In the quiet, humming corridors of a dying corporation, some things are consumed, and some things do the consuming. At OmniCorp, where ambition goes to curdle, the break room refrigerator is more than a repository for forgotten lunches and expired yogurt. It is a vessel, a shrine to decay. And for David Miller, a data analyst drowning in mediocrity, it is the heart of a creeping, silent plague. He is about to discover that the strange, iridescent black mold growing in its depths is not just feeding on old food, but on the very soul of the company, and it's saving the best for last. Let's begin the story. Get comfortable and listen closely. The hum was the first thing you noticed about OmniCorp. It wasn't the productive buzz of a thriving business, but the low, sallow, electrical drone of life support. It emanated from the flickering fluorescent lights overhead, which cast everything in a sickly, greenish pallor. It vibrated up from the decades-old mainframe in the server room and seeped into the very bones of the building. For David Miller, it was the soundtrack to his stagnation. At 34, David was an expert in analyzing patterns of decay. His job was to create spreadsheets that charted OmniCorp's slow, agonizing slide into irrelevance. He tracked declining sales, plummeting engagement, and the ever-increasing synergistic reorganizations, a corporate euphemism for layoffs. The office itself was a physical manifestation of his data. The carpets bore a pale geography of forgotten coffee spills, the fabric on the cubicle walls was pockmarked with the ghosts of thumbtacks from long-gone employees, and the air was thick with the quiet desperation of people waiting for the axe to fall. The epicenter of this corporate rot, the true heart of its decay, was the break room. It was a place of profound sadness, with its overflowing recycling bin, its countertop permanently sticky with coffee rings, and its bulletin board of curled, sun-bleached OSHA posters. And in the corner, humming its own discordant tune, was the refrigerator. It was an ancient beige beast, its surface yellowed with age, its handle bearing the greasy patina of 1,000 indifferent hands. It was a place where forgotten dreams and tuna sandwiches went to die. On a particularly bleak Tuesday, David's will to live was powered solely by the promise of the leftover spicy chicken sandwich he'd brought from home. He pushed open the break room door, the smell of burnt popcorn and stale coffee washing over him. He pulled open the heavy refrigerator door, and the hum deepened into a low groan. But another smell hit him then, a smell that bulldozed through the room's usual miasma. It was a wave of sweet, chemical decay and something else, something ancient and fungal. His eyes scanned the shelves, past the sad-looking yogurt cups and the Tupperware container of limp salad that had been there since last week's Wellness Wednesday. In the very back, almost hidden behind a jar of expired pickles, was the source. It was a glass container, its contents long since rendered unrecognizable, but that wasn't what held his attention. The container was covered, caked, in a thick, black, tar-like substance. It wasn't the familiar green or white fuzz of common mold. This was different. It was profoundly, unnaturally black, and as the sickly light from the fridge bulb hit it, he saw a faint, oily iridescence shimmer across its surface, like a slick of gasoline on a puddle. "Jesus Christ," he muttered, recoiling. Mark from accounting shuffled in behind him, heading for the coffee pot. "What's up?" "Someone's Tupperware is about to achieve sentience," David said, pointing. "You smell that?" Mark leaned in, squinted, and shrugged. The apathy was so thick on him it was like a second skin. "Gross. Someone will get it eventually." He turned away, his attention already lost to the prospect of his lukewarm coffee. David sighed. Of course. Of course. Someone will get it eventually was OmniCorp's unofficial motto. He abandoned his sandwich, his appetite suddenly gone, and returned to the drone of his cubicle. The next day, driven by a morbid curiosity, he checked the fridge again. The offensive container was gone. A small, unfamiliar wave of relief washed over him. He imagined Mr. Henderson, the building's weary janitor, had finally donned a hazmat suit and disposed of the biohazard. But then he noticed something else. A half-eaten sheet cake left over from a farewell party for a laid-off marketing manager the previous week was also gone. It had been on the top shelf, wrapped loosely in plastic wrap. It wasn't in the trash. The entire bulky rectangular cardboard base was just gone, not thrown away, vanished. David stared at the empty space where the cake had been, a cold knot tightening in his stomach. The low hum of the refrigerator seemed, for a moment, to sound like a sigh. The relief was short-lived. The mold was not gone. 2 days later, a small dark blemish appeared on the interior back wall of the refrigerator, right where the horrifying Tupperware had been festering. It was no bigger than a quarter, but it was unmistakably the same substance, a deep, light-devouring black with that same sick petroleum iridescence. David stared at it, a prickle of unease crawling up his spine. He told himself it was just a remnant, a stain left behind. But it grew. Over the next week, he watched it with a grim fascination. It didn't spread like normal mold in a fuzzy, organic pattern. It expanded in a smooth, deliberate way, like a drop of black ink bleeding into paper in slow motion. By Friday, it was the size of his palm. And the disappearances continued. An old carton of milk he'd seen yesterday was gone. A wilted bunch of parsley. A Tupperware of forgotten spaghetti that had been cultivating a healthy ecosystem of its own green fuzz. Anything old, anything forgotten, anything left near the creeping black stain would simply vanish by the next morning. It wasn't being thrown out. The trash cans were never full of discarded food. The fridge was simply tidier. Emptier on Monday of the following week, David saw Mr. Henderson wrestling with a leaking trash bag in the hallway. The janitor was a man who looked as old and tired as the building itself, his face a road map of weary resignation. "Mr. Henderson," David began, "quick question about the break room fridge. Did you happen to clear out a bunch of old food from it over the weekend?" The old man stopped, his shoulders slumping. His eyes, usually glazed over with fatigue, darted to David's with a sudden, sharp focus. He looked down the empty hallway before leaning in, his voice a low, gravelly whisper. "I ain't touched that fridge in a week, not since I saw that stain start to grow." "The black mold?" David asked, his own voice dropping. Henderson nodded, his expression darkening. "Don't leave your food in there overnight, son," he rasped, his hand gripping the neck of the trash bag. "Not anymore. That's not just mold. It's hungry." Before David could ask what he meant, the old man straightened up, shook his head as if to clear it, and muttered, "Leaky faucet on the 3rd floor needs seeing to." He shuffled away, leaving David standing in the humming silence of the hallway, the word hungry echoing in his ears. From that day on, the break room itself began to feel different. A change was in the air, thick and cloying. It was a faint, sweet, sickly smell, like overripe fruit and damp earth. David noticed it the moment he walked in, a heavy, humid presence that seemed to cling to the back of his throat. He could feel it on his skin, a strange, damp chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. The smell was strongest near the refrigerator. It seemed to pulse out from the ancient appliance, even when the door was firmly shut. The break room was no longer just a place of neglect. It was becoming a place of active decay, and the humming beige box in the corner was its beating, ravenous heart. The spores were invisible, but their effect was not. A profound, unnatural lethargy began to settle over the office, a cognitive fog that was thicker than the usual Monday morning slump. David saw it first in his team manager, Sarah Vance. Once a sharp, ambitious woman who color-coded her project plans and spoke in crisp bullet points, Sarah had become strangely placid. During a critical project meeting, she stared blankly at a projection screen for nearly a minute, forgetting a key deadline she herself had set. Later that week, David found her at her desk, gazing at her monitor with the mouse cursor blinking on an empty email, her expression as smooth and empty as a porcelain doll's. It wasn't just her. The general low morale of OmniCorp, the quiet desperation of an office awaiting its own execution, was curdling into something new. It was a deep, pervasive apathy. Colleagues who used to complain about the workload now did their tasks with a slow, robotic indifference. The usual office chatter faded into a dull hum of keyboard clicks. People stopped making eye contact. They ate lunch at their desks, staring at their screens, or shuffled into the break room, retrieved their food from the humming fridge, and left without a word. The break room, once a place for gallows humor camaraderie, had become a silent, transactional space. David, paranoid now, started packing lunches that didn't require refrigeration. But one hectic Wednesday, in a rush to get to a meeting, he forgot his lunch bag, containing a perfectly made roast beef sandwich on rye, his favorite, on his desk. He returned an hour later to find it gone. A frantic search revealed nothing. Then, with a sinking heart, he remembered. A well-meaning colleague, seeing it left out, had said, "I'll pop this in the fridge for you so it doesn't go bad." He walked to the break room, a cold dread coiling in his gut. The sickly sweet smell was stronger today. He pulled open the fridge door. His lunch bag was gone. His eyes shot to the back wall. The black, iridescent patch of mold was visibly larger than it had been that morning. And as he stared at it, he could have sworn he saw its oily surface pulse, a slow, rhythmic contraction like the flexing of a muscle. A flare of hot, white anger shot through him. Someone had stolen his lunch. He was about to storm out and demand who took it, but then a strange wave washed over him. It was a feeling of immense, dull resignation. A heavy, syrupy thought, not his own, filled his mind. It doesn't matter. It's just a sandwich. Nothing matters. The anger vanished, leaving behind a hollow sense of calm. The feeling was so alien, so powerful, that it scared him more than the missing sandwich. He slammed the fridge door shut, his heart hammering against his ribs. That was when he made the connection. The smell, the apathy, the mold. He realized the sickly sweet smell was always strongest right after something had disappeared from the fridge. It wasn't just a smell of decay. It was an emission, an exhaust. He imagined the mold, this parasitic entity, consuming a forgotten yogurt or his roast beef sandwich and then releasing a puff of something. Spores. Microscopic, airborne, and psychoactive. It wasn't just eating the food, it was feeding the employees its essence. It was force-feeding them apathy, draining them of their will, making them forgetful and compliant. The mold was pacifying its environment, ensuring no one would have the energy or the motivation to ever clean out the fridge and disturb its feast. David's analytical mind, usually mired in OmniCorp's financial data, now had a new, terrifying data set to process. He began treating the situation not as a janitorial issue, but as a biological threat. He spent his evenings falling down internet rabbit holes, diving into obscure mycological forums and academic papers. He researched extremophilic fungi, parasitic slime molds, and anything that hinted at a usual biological consumption. The name cordyceps kept coming up, the fungus that hijacks the brains of insects, turning them into zombies to serve its reproductive cycle. He stared at microscopic images of spores invading an ant's neural tissue, and a cold sweat broke out on his skin. Was this some unknown variant? A species that had evolved to prey not on insects, but on the stressed, desperate, and nutritionally deficient inhabitants of a dying office building? He needed more information. He needed to talk to the only other person who seemed to understand that something was wrong. The next morning, he cornered Mr. Henderson in the utility closet on his floor, the air thick with the smell of ammonia and industrial soap. "We need to talk about the fridge," David said, his voice low and urgent. "You said it was hungry. What did you mean?" The old janitor's face seemed to collapse in on itself, the lines of exhaustion deepening into fissures of fear. He looked past David down the hall before pulling him deeper into the cramped closet. "I tried to get rid of it," he confessed, his voice a ragged whisper. "Months ago, before it got to the fridge. The problem started in the sub-basement, leaky pipe near some old storage lockers. Found a patch of this black stuff growing on some old files, forgotten furniture." He shuddered, a full-body tremor. "I hit it with everything, bleach, industrial fungicide, even tried a blowtorch once. Every time it just came back, stronger. It's like it learns. It retreated, went into the walls, I think. Then it found the break room. It found the fridge." He looked at David, his eyes wide with a terrible understanding. "It likes it in there. It's a larder, a constant supply. And the hum, that electrical field, it seems to help it grow." Then he delivered the detail that made David's blood run cold. "You remember Tom from logistics, the guy they laid off 2 months back?" David nodded vaguely. "Well, the day he got the news, he'd just gone grocery shopping, left a whole bag in that fridge, milk, eggs, meat, never came back for it. I saw him in the parking lot that evening, just standing by his car, looking lost. I asked if he was okay. He said he couldn't remember where he was supposed to go, seemed to forget his own way home." The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The fridge wasn't just a breeding ground, it was the entity's core, its heart, its mouth. The constant hum of the compressor and the cold, dark environment were the perfect incubator. The forgotten food was just an appetizer, a way to sustain itself. The real meal, the true source of its nourishment, was the psychic energy of the employees. It was feeding on their despair, their broken ambitions, their forgotten dreams, and their memories. It was consuming them slowly, spore by spore, with every breath they took in the contaminated break room. OmniCorp wasn't just going out of business, it was being digested. The infestation was accelerating. The entity was no longer content with its cold plastic home. David first noticed a small dark stain on the beige wallpaper behind the refrigerator, a shadow that wasn't cast by any light. A week later, he saw it on the ceiling tiles directly above, a spiderweb of faint black veins spreading from a central dark spot. The break room was becoming a terrarium, a fully infested space. The sickly sweet smell of decay was no longer just a scent, it was a presence. The air felt heavy, wet, and alive. The effect on his colleagues was now profound. They moved through the office like ghosts, their faces slack, their eyes vacant. They sat at their desks performing their duties with the barest mechanical effort, all spark of innovation or enthusiasm extinguished. The company's slow decline had become a nosedive. Projects stalled, clients were ignored. The humming silence was broken only by the occasional, hollow-sounding conference call. The corporate rot was no longer a metaphor, it was a literal, fungal consumption from the inside out. David began to actively avoid the break room, a decision that felt like self-preservation. He ate his lunch in his car, took his coffee breaks at the Starbucks down the street, and held his breath whenever he had to walk past the break room's door. He was isolating himself, becoming an island of anxiety in a sea of apathy. And the entity noticed. It recognized his resistance. One Thursday morning, he arrived at his cubicle to find a fresh cup of coffee on his desk, a peace offering from a colleague. He picked up the ceramic mug, his personal mug, the one with the snarky, fading cartoon on it, and was about to take a sip when he saw it. There, on the curved white surface just below the rim, was a tiny, perfect circle of black, iridescent mold. A wave of pure, ice-cold terror washed over him. It wasn't just in the break room anymore. It had sought him out. It had crossed the floor, navigated the maze of cubicles, and marked his territory. It was a message, a warning. You cannot escape. We know who you are. He felt a visceral, psychic pressure, a targeted wave of hopelessness pushing in on him, urging him to just give in, to take a sip, to join the calm, quiet majority. That night, his sleep was plagued by a vivid, suffocating nightmare. He wasn't at the office, he was in his own apartment. But the black, oily mold was there. It was crawling over his personal projects, the half-finished novel on his laptop, the woodworking tools in his closet, the travel books on his shelf. He watched in horror as his ambitions, his private dreams, his very identity outside of OmniCorp were consumed, turning into a bubbling, iridescent black sludge. The mold slithered towards him, and he could feel it trying to enter his mind, trying to eat the memories of what he loved. He woke up gasping, drenched in sweat, a feeling of profound, bottomless hopelessness clinging to him. For a terrifying, blank moment, he couldn't remember why he had been so worried in the first place. The spores were in him. He was its next meal. There was no one to call. Complaining to HR or management was a useless, absurd idea. They were the most infected, the first to succumb. They were the placid, smiling zombies who would assure him everything was fine, while a tendril of black mold crept from their nostrils. Mr. Henderson was too terrified to do anything more than whisper warnings. David was alone. He had to take out the heart. His mind, sharpened by fear and adrenaline, worked feverishly. Cleaning it wasn't enough. Chemicals weren't enough. Henderson had already proven that. The entity would just retreat, learn, and return stronger. He had to remove it. He had to sever its connection to its power source, its larder, its home. He had to get the refrigerator out of the building. The plan formed, simple and desperate. He would stay late, long after the last of his listless colleagues had shuffled out into the evening. He would wait until the building was empty, until the only sounds were the hum of the server room and the growl from the break room. That night, David watched the clock, his leg bouncing with a nervous energy that felt alien in the lethargic office. At 7 o'clock, the last employee, Sarah, drifted past his cubicle, her eyes glassy. "Good night, David," she said, her voice a flat monotone. He waited another hour, listening to the silence reclaim the floor. Then, armed with a pair of work gloves he'd found in his car and a dolly he'd borrowed from the mailroom, he rose from his desk. As he approached the break room, the sickly sweet smell hit him like a physical blow. It was overwhelming now, so thick he could taste it on his tongue, an earthy, sugary rot. The air was heavy, humid, and cold. He pushed the door open. The low hum of the refrigerator was gone. In its place was a deep, guttural growl, a vibrational thrum that seemed to shake the very floor tiles. It was the sound of a sleeping beast that had been disturbed. He flicked on the light switch. The black mold had consumed almost the entire interior of the fridge. It coated every shelf, every wall, the door itself. It was no longer a static stain. It was moving, pulsing with a faint internal bioluminescent light, its iridescent surface swirling like a dark galaxy. As he stepped closer, he felt it, an immense psychic pressure, a tsunami of pure apathy and despair washing over him, a silent, deafening scream in his mind. Leave. It doesn't matter. Go home, sleep, forget. It is so much easier to forget. He felt his muscles go slack, his resolve crumbling. The dolly suddenly felt impossibly heavy. It would be so easy to just turn around, to walk away, to become one of them. The wave of apathy was a physical force, pressing him down, making his limbs feel like lead. The entity's voice, a chorus of exhausted whispers in his mind, promised the sweet release of not caring. Why fight it? This is peace. This is the end of striving. "No," David whispered, the word a desperate rasp. He fought back. He forced his mind to work, to rebel. He dredged up every frustration, every ounce of resentment he had for OmniCorp, for his stalled career, for his monotonous life. He channeled his fear and his anger into fuel. He pictured his half-written novel, the grain of the wood in his workshop, the face of his sister, the taste of a good beer. He held on to these memories, these fragments of a life worth living, like a shield against the crushing psychic assault. He gritted his teeth and forced his legs to move, one agonizing step at a time, toward the growling refrigerator. The air was so thick with spores, it was like wading through water. He reached behind the monstrous appliance, his fingers fumbling for the power cord. The plastic was slick and strangely warm. With a surge of adrenaline, he yanked the cord from the wall socket. The growl cut off instantly. The deep hum died. The faint, swirling light inside the mold faded to a dull, oily black. The entire mass seemed to recoil, to shrink in on itself with a wet, slithering sound. The psychic pressure lessened, but it was still there, a lingering miasma of despair. He knew it wasn't enough. He had to get it out. He wrestled the mailroom dolly into position and, with a strength born of pure terror, began to heave the heavy, contaminated refrigerator away from the wall. The mold fought back. A thick, choking cloud of black spores puffed out from the broken seal of the door, engulfing him. His vision swam. The break room dissolved into a hallucinatory nightmare. He saw Sarah's face, a blank, smiling mask with black sludge leaking from her eyes. He saw his own hands, covered in the iridescent mold, his fingers elongating into dark tendrils. The whispers intensified, promising him he could finally rest if he just let go. He roared, a primal sound of defiance, and gave one final desperate shove. The refrigerator tilted and crashed onto the dolly with a sickening crunch. He fought through the haze, his lungs burning, his mind screaming. He pushed the dolly out of the break room, its wheels squealing in protest. He got it into the service elevator, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The ride down to the loading dock was the longest of his life, trapped in a metal box with the silent, pulsing heart of the office's decay. In the cool night air of the alley behind the building, he finished the job. He had come prepared. From a duffel bag, he pulled multiple large bottles of industrial-strength bleach and ammonia. Ignoring the warnings on the labels, he poured them all into the refrigerator, dousing the black, recoiling mass in a flood of caustic chemicals. A horrific, high-pitched hiss filled the air as the mold began to dissolve, releasing a final, putrid plume of black smoke. It was a desperate, brutal act of chemical warfare. Shaking and gasping for air, he pulled out his phone and called the 24-hour number for a hazardous waste disposal team, claiming he'd found a badly leaking old commercial fridge. The next day at OmniCorp, the air was different. It was just air. The oppressive, heavy atmosphere was gone. The sickly sweet smell had vanished. David walked through the halls and saw color in his colleagues' faces for the first time in months. People were talking, complaining, even laughing. It was as if the entire office was waking up from a long, strange fog. They were confused, complaining of headaches and gaps in their memories of the past few weeks. In a morning meeting, Sarah looked at a complex project plan with a sharp, critical eye, firing off questions and suggestions with an ambition he hadn't seen in nearly a year. The company's sudden, inexplicable surge in productivity and morale didn't save it. The decay had gone on for too long. The layoffs, the ones David had been charting for months, finally happened. His name was on the list. But as he packed his personal effects into a cardboard box, he didn't feel despair. He felt a profound, cleansing sense of relief. Walking out of the OmniCorp building for the last time, he saw Mr. Henderson by the door. The old janitor didn't speak, but he gave David a single, slow nod, a look of deep, weary gratitude. Months later, David was a different man. He was working at a vibrant, successful tech startup. The office was bright, full of glass walls and a palpable sense of energy. The break room was pristine, the stainless steel fridge gleaming. His career was back on track, and the memories of OmniCorp were beginning to feel like a bad dream. One afternoon, a colleague, a friendly woman named Chloe, brought in a homemade yogurt cake to celebrate a product launch. "You have to try a piece, David. It's my grandmother's recipe." He smiled, a genuine smile, and accepted a slice. He took a bite. It was delicious, creamy and sweet. He felt happy, content, safe. But then, for just a fleeting second, Underneath the bright tang of the yogurt and the sweetness of the cake, he detected another flavor. It was a faint, familiar, and deeply unsettling taste. Earthy, cloyingly sweet, and sickly. A cold dread trickled down his spine. He looked up at Chloe, who was smiling as she offered a piece to someone else. But her eyes looked just a little bit tired, a little bit apathetic. His gaze dropped back to the cake pan on the counter. And there, at the bottom of the glass pan, almost invisible against the white ceramic, he saw it. A tiny, singular, black and iridescent speck. Enjoyed the story? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below.